Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and I am the host of the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. Sometimes we go off on tangents as well. Today we have a guest, a wonderful local historian, Ghlee Woodworth. Ghlee, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for asking me, Dyke.
Well, it's June already, and we're looking at some big events in the summer. Yankee Homecoming is coming up, which we'll talk about. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, you've really created a great reputation and written several books about the Clipper Heritage Trail here in Newburyport. Can you talk a little about what your books have focused on? And also, you do have actual tours in the summer, and perhaps you can talk about that.
Okay, thank you. The Clipper Heritage Trail, I created that probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it was really based on listening to a lot of participants in my tours as far as having the convenience to learn about local history. Because often they'd say, oh, I missed your tour, I want to go on your tour, and so forth. So I created this series of self-guided history tours. And at first it was created as a website, and the website is still up, Newburyport Clipper Heritage Trail. And you could download brochures and look at maps and so forth all through the downtown area. And then about 4 years ago, I decided to put it in a book. And of course, the tours expanded, and it turned out that I needed 2 books. So Clipper Heritage Trail Volume 1, published in 2020 during COVID, focuses mostly on the downtown. There's tours on Market Square, State Street, Pleasant Street, Green Street, Brown Square, and so forth. And I also write, one of my favorite stories that I researched was the story about urban renewal, and how in the 60s we almost lost, and people don't realize how close the bulldozer was headed for N Street and Market Square to knock down all those buildings. And so I tell that story through the people, that small group of people who saved the downtown. And then now I'm working on Volume 2. That'll be out in the fall, Clipper Heritage Trail Volume 2. And those tours will go from Plum Island to Maudsley State Park. And there's 9 tours again, and almost 400 images, maps, and legends.
Can you go over what you mean by the word self-guided? I mean, I know what the term means, of course, but could you repeat how people would, if say they're from out of town, or, they just wanted to learn a little more and have a self-guided moment, how would they do that?
Well, they can go on to Newburyport Clipper Heritage Trail, and they click on, they get to the homepage, and they'll see mobile website. And they check mobile website on their smartphone. It's free. Touch mobile website, and they have 2 choices: downtown tour or city tour. So they touch downtown tour. They'll come to a map, and there'll be about 20 locations. And they touch Market Square, and a page pops up with an image and about 300 words about Market Square. Then they can go back and they can touch N Street, and again, it comes up. So that's one way. There's also downloadable brochures on the website. As far as the books, the Volume 1 and Volume 2, they can sit home comfortably in their favorite chair, or a late night reading in bed, and they can just go through the book. Now, the key is that, for example, Volume 2 will have 2 South End tours, or 2 North End tours, or a tour about Bartlett Mall neighborhood. Yes. And the key is that they don't have to start at the beginning of the book and go through. They can just open up any page. There are so many images. Someone said once, oh, I just like looking at the images. Well, there's almost 400 images that they can look at.
Now, are they modern? Are they old-timey? Or are they a little of both, Ghlee?
I would say probably 98% of them are old,
Mhm.
from the 1800s, because the first photograph was taken in 1839. So most of those photographs in the book are from the 1870s, 80s, 90s.
Mhm.
Um,
When
and
when you reflect upon people who have, been to your site and have taken the tours, what are areas of interest that people think about? I mean, do they go down? Do they like to walk along the waterfront? Do they like to think, well, how did the Custom House Museum get here? What are
Right.
some of the areas that people really seem interested in?
I focus on all kinds of areas, from architecture to artists to shipyards, to the coal industry, to the comb factory. So there's a variety of comments as far as there's something for everyone
Mhm.
on Clipper Heritage Trail. And that's key, because there's some people, oh, those big old boats I don't really care about, but I love the architecture. I love walking the
Yes.
streets and looking right that. Yeah. Or the decorative combs. Oh, wow, I never knew about that. Or, oh, I'm an artist and I love reading about the artists. So that's key for me, that I've always tried to go from A to Z and tried to get as many topics. And that's what people, when they talk to me, they always bring up everybody's bringing up different
Mhm.
topics to me.
When I've heard you speak in different times, it seems like you get a mix of people. Some have lived here quite a while in Newburyport.
Yes.
Others might be here for the summer. What is your sense? Is about 50-50, or, are most people newcomers to the area who go on your tours?
No, there's certainly the regulars. Some have said, oh, I went on a tour with your dad and now I've been on several tours with you. There's lots of local people who love the events during Yankee homecoming. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who've just arrived in Newburyport and they love learning about Newburyport history. So there's a combination, old
Can
and
you
new.
talk a little about your father? You just mentioned him briefly. I know he was, a wonderful historian, and I think probably got you interested in. He had a great knowledge of the cemeteries, and which of course is, the great first edition of history. Maybe you can talk a little about him and how his interest may have pulled you along.
Well, he grew up here, certainly, and then became a funeral
His name?
director, Todd Woodworth.
Uh-huh.
And his mother's side of the family, that's where we are connected directly to Robert Adams, who settled
Oh, really?
here in Newbury in 1640. And I am a 12th generation native. So my father became a funeral director in the late 40s, and throughout his life, he retired in the late 80s. So obviously he was interested in cemeteries. He had a lot of knowledge of who was buried there. And one day in 1988, a friend, Liam, was looking for John Winder, who was a photographer.
Mhm.
And he was a brother-in-law of the Ghlees family. And so my father said, well, meet at Oak Hill at the main gate. And so as he was walking through Oak Hill with Liam, he was pointing out all of these historic figures. Oh, there's Isaac Boardman, the mayor, there's
Right.
Harry Prescott Spofford, the poet, and so forth. And Liam said, Todd, you should do a tour. And my father said, no one's going to be interested in this. And Liam said, no, I think so. So in the October of 1988, I have that ad. And they advertised in the Daily News and said, come to Oak Hill Cemetery and tiptoe through the tombstones with Todd. And about 40 people.
Well, that's very alliterative. It must have
Yes.
caught the attention of readers.
Yeah. And about 40 people showed up. So he started offering them since 1988 through 2005. And then his last tour in 2005. And I said, and I had been all those years, I was down south working at a small private college. Then in 91 to 2004, I was involved in Peace Corps. And finally, I was worn out. traveling. And so I was here full time and starting in 2005. And he said, I think that's my last tour. And I said, well, I'll take over. And what people is a misconception is that they think that I grew up with local history and my father taught me a lot. And that's not true, because he was working still. I was off college, grad school working. And I had only gone on one tiptoe tour. I happened to be home and I took photographs. So when I said in August of 2005, I said, well, I'll do the tours. I knew nothing. I didn't know how to get around Oak Hill. I knew nothing. And he had maybe 2 pages of notes and that's it. So from there, I did that because I knew how much my father meant to the community, how much the community enjoyed his tours, and how much my father loved helping people and learning about history. And so I did just studied and studied for months and read, and people taught me how to research. And so I gave my first tiptoe tour the summer of 2006 for Yankee Homecoming.
Wow.
And I haven't looked back from there. By the end of the year, I'll have about 200 presentations and tours since 2006.
No, that's true. Well, in addition to having a great history here in Newburyport, we also have great sources. And the cemeteries are one area, but our archive in the basement of the Newbury Public Library is rather remarkable. But let me ask you about this, because there's been a change in the last year at the Museum of Old Newbury. Now, do they have a good collection themselves, or that's a high street institution? Yes. Or is that merged in with the library? Is it separate or is it merged with the library?
No, they're definitely separate, but Sharon, our archivist, works at the library, and then she does some work for the museum. And so everybody works together. So the library, absolutely the archival center, I think we probably have one of the best in New England. And the museum is slowly getting all their resources organized. But they are an excellent resource. And the thing is that not all towns and cities have our resources as far as written materials and written histories. You know, with Courier, and you've got Vale and so forth. We have so many history books written, and a lot of towns and cities, they might have 1 or 2 or a couple. And then the photographs, I learned this from Scott Nason, who is a local historian and collector. And he told me several years ago, and he had been over all his, the few decades, going to all kinds of conferences and yard sales and been in Boston and so forth, all about local history, collections of photographs and so forth. And he said, Ghlee, he said, Newburyport and West Newbury and Newbury. So the 3 Newburys. He said, Newburyport has a better photograph collection than Boston does.
Wow.
Of the community. And I was shocked, but why? Well, Dr. Henry Coit Perkins in 1839, he was technically the second photographer in the United States, but he took the first aerial views in the United States, and he was up on the church steeples on the Harris Street Church.
Are there any of those photos or negatives around?
Yes, and the Museum of Old Newbury has a collection of glass plates of Dr. Perkins. So that's one reason he led the way. And then we had more photographers following in his footsteps. We had Selwyn Reed, H.P. McIntosh, William Thompson, John Winder. So that's one of the huge reasons why we have such a wonderful collection of photographs. And I am all for, let's get those images out so people can enjoy them.
Well, this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. I am Dyke Hendrickson, the host. I'm speaking with Ghlee Woodworth, a prominent local historian. This is 96.3 radio and Channel 9 local cable TV, and we're archived on YouTube. Well, in addition to having great resources in institutions, we also have a very busy summer. There are historical developments and historical presentations. During Yankee Homecoming, and you're very much involved in that. You're the key organizer. Can you talk about a couple things that will be coming up at the end of July and the first week of August in Yankee Homecoming?
Yes. So I've been the chair since 2007 of Heritage Tours and Events, and we always have such a great variety of events. We have slideshows at the library. Then and now, the Clipper Heritage Trail. Dyke, you of course will be doing one on the Merrimack, Plum Island, excuse me, on Plum Island. Susan Harvey, who has done much research on.
She has a very, not to interrupt, but she has a very interesting presentation. She
Oh,
really
yeah.
does.
It's wonderful, and she's updating it constantly. She's still teaching.
I would just mention that Susan Harvey, she spoke several years ago, and she's done a lot of research on the slave trade, the sugar trade, how Newburyport interacted with these institutions, and she has a great wealth of knowledge on this. So I'm looking forward to that one myself, Ghlee.
Yeah, excellent. She's the foremost as far as Newburyport involved in the slave trade. And
yes, absolutely.
Did we build ships for the slave trade? Yes. Jack Santos will be doing a slideshow on what Self. It was down in Market Square. Then we have some walking tours.
Now you're going to be going on a cruise, are you not, Ghlee?
Yeah.
I've been on that one before. It's really a wonderful, as you say, it's a wonderful trip on the water, but talk a little about the history as well, if you will.
Yeah, I teamed up with Captain Paul Aziz of Yankee Clipper, the Harbor Tours boat, which is always docked down close to the Black Cow, Black Cow. And it's a tour that starts at the waterfront and goes all the way up just past Lowe's Boat Shop. And it's a beautiful ride. It's a couple hours. And along the way, I do talk about history, a lot of the shipyards and so forth. I pass out lots of images. But it's absolutely a beautiful tour if someone who has never been on the river before, and to take a ride up the river. And it's just a whole different view of Newburyport. And I'll be doing three tours this summer, but he has tours consistently starting in this month through September.
And one of the things I love about that upriver is there's so many interesting houses and along the river. I mean, some houses you can see from the road, others you can't. Right. And it's just interesting. Plus, there's a lot of beautiful forest land. Maudsley is along the river. Yes. That part of Amesbury, which is beautiful residential area near the old Kelcourse marina. It's just, there's a lot to see on that trip.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And we have walking tours. Christine Malpica, she's kind of our go-to specialist in town on Indigenous peoples. So she'll be doing a walking tour on the Indigenous people. Then there's If This House Could Talk. That has become huge, anywhere from 80 to 100 houses. The owners will have signs outside their homes talking about the ownership and people who live there in different events. And that's just a great way to see the city. You walk.
It is, and
yeah.
In its own way, it's a walking tour because you can just loiter along, and every other house perhaps will have a history of the house. Sometimes they've heard of the people, sometimes not, but you just walk along, and some people have written very clever histories of their own houses, and others have in-depth details. So Jack Santos really did a good thing when he and others put that together.
Yeah. I remember that first meeting, and it was his son who said, such and such town near Boston has this, look into this. And I remember we were down on Middle Street Cafe and talking about it. And I thought, hey, go for it. Let's give it a try. And it's been a huge hit. Also during Yankee Homecoming, the Powder House will be open.
Yeah. And how about the Superior Court, Ghlee? That is, if you walk along there, I mean, there's wonderful history and on a plaque there. I think it's 1805, the oldest ongoing courthouse in the country. And, you know, are you having something on that this summer?
Yes, they will be opening up. The clerk magistrate, Tom Driscoll, I contact him every year and I said, can you open up? And he loves that. And if people have not been into the courthouse, go. It's a beautiful courtroom. It's actually
really is.
Beautiful. Yeah, so definitely that. And then the churches. St. Paul's will be doing a tour. Central Church on Titcomb Street. And also Old South will be doing tours. So folks, get into those churches and learn a little bit about the history. They're beautiful, beautiful churches.
Now, in the old days of shipbuilding, and of course that ushered in ship commerce, were the churches used? I mean, was there altitude, if you will, was there height used to watch ships come in? I know that it's set on High Street, you know, some of the Widows Walks on High Street, you could see the harbor, but could you see the harbor from some of the churches?
Oh, definitely if you were up in the steeples, but I think also more importantly is that when the ships were coming in, and visualize that there still were no jetties until the beginnings of 1880s and 90s. But they would see the church steeples, and that helped them come into the harbor.
That must have been a welcome sight for a lot of
Yes.
those sailors, because some people know it, but you know, ships from Newburyport were really all over the world to the West Indies, and coming back. In fact, it was said in some of the, you know, the histories that, you know, a young man could have been to Honolulu and, you know, the Far East, and had never been to Boston, because they get in when they're maybe 16, they come back 2 years later, spend a month at home and go out again. So, you know, it could be a very lively life on the high seas here going out of Newburyport.
Absolutely. Newburyport ships went to about 70 ports around the world. 70. That's just incredible. So and what's neat about it, and I do include this in my trail volume 2, is some of the diaries and journals that folks kept while out on the sea sailing around the world. Pretty neat sources of information about the life on the ships.
And, you know, as I understand it, a ship from Newburyport could be docked in, you know, Shanghai or something, and it sees another ship from Newburyport. They gather together, they trade gossip. I mean, you know, it was a small world and a very large world. But as you point out, there are numerous diaries and reflections on this, that Newburyporters could see other folk in different parts of the world.
Yeah, Captain Stephen Bray, his wife, Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I forget, I've lost her first name, maybe Elizabeth Bray. She kept a journal, and so there were wives. Once the ships got a little bit more comfortable, they were probably a bit rough in the mid 1700s, but come late 17 and just past 1800 or in the mid 1800s, those ships were quite comfortable, first class, and many of the wives accompanied, including children, accompanied the father, husband / sea captain on board those ships, and often many of them kept journals.
One thing that struck me, on a clear day you can see forever and all that. I mean, in good sailing, it must have been wonderful. But some of the sailing, particularly in the commercial vein, when they shipped timber or granite, I mean, they were sailing in January and February. So the number of accidents and the number of, you know, if you were lost overboard in January, you know, if you slipped or you fell out of a loft or something, there must be numerous examples of death on the high seas.
Oh my goodness, what a rough life. You know, it's tough enough nowadays, even when some of these ships, the cruise ships, are in storms, right? But these ships, they're sailing and getting thrown around. And just off of Plum Island, as you know, we had 100+ shipwrecks. And
Yes.
often, and many of those sailors and captains did not make it. So what a tough life, because sometimes down wintertime, I love going jogging on the beach at 6 a.m. watching the sunrise. And sometimes it's pretty wild out there and blowing, and it's pretty rough. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I just think about all of those vessels out there with their crews. What a tough, tough life.
Well, I think also it was difficult because now, as you say, the jetties came in, say, about 1890, but even before that, it's a very shallow opening to the harbor. It's quite narrow. You have a swift current going to the east. You have tides coming in from the west, depending on its ebbing or coming in. So just getting into the harbor must have been, you took experience, and, you had to watch the tides, and you have to be careful of many different elements.
Well, I grew up, and my brother and I, we had a boat. We had a 12-footer, 50 horsepower, and friends and I would go out, and we would go out the mouth of the river. And I tell you what, those waves were like 12 feet tall. And we're going, ooh, ooh, ooh. And it's just unbelievable. We would go out and then coming back in, and it was pretty hairy at times.
And plus, as there's a sandbar generally out there, and sometimes it shifts from year to year. So you have to become aware of that kind of impediment as well. Well, I'm talking with Ghlee Woodworth, and she's a local historian. She's going to be putting together a number of events this summer. And again, this is Life Along the Merrimack, 96.3 FM radio, Joppa Radio, Channel 9 local cable TV, and we're archived on YouTube. Maybe you can tell the listeners, we just have a minute or two more, Ghlee. Talk a little about Yankee Homecoming, when it starts, and how people could learn about when your offerings will be available.
Okay. This year, past couple of years, Yankee Homecoming does not have a printed program book like they did for many, many years. So they're hoping the Daily News will be publishing a small booklet on all the events. Certainly go on to the Yankee Homecoming website, and you can see heritage tours and events, and just click on that page. And we've got about 17 events and tours, slideshows listed on that page, so you can check that out. And I believe social media will be having announcements also.
And if people wanted to buy your book, Ghlee, where could they buy your book?
They can.
You have two books, but
Newburyport Clipper Heritage Trail, Volume 1. They can contact me. I'm in the old-fashioned phone book, or the modern technology of Google. So they can buy it from me, or the Chamber, the Custom House, Maritime Museum, and the Museum of Old Newbury up on Fruit Street also have copies of my book. And my Trail Volume 2 book will be out later this fall.
Well, that sounds interesting. Ghlee Woodworth, thank you very much for being on the show, on the podcast. I will be seeing you throughout the spring. And of course, I'm looking forward to a lot of events that you're having this summer. I would just mention to people, I was at the Custom House Maritime Museum Friday night for First Friday. I heard John McCone of the Watershed Council speak about the river. And they have a wonderful exhibit of some of the old, real historic people of Newburyport. It's at the Maritime Museum on Water Street. So if you want to take a walk someday, go into the Maritime Museum. They really did a good job. Ghlee, thank you very much. We'll talk again this summer. Thank you for being with us. This is Life Along the Merrimack, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks again, Ghlee.
Bye now. Thank you.
Bye-bye.